Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather, and on this channel we like to walk a very fine line between a shopping addicted makeup monster and a responsible adult with a makeup hobby. Now, I really enjoy eyeshadow singles, duochromes, multichromes, blush, highlight, lip gloss, basically everything except pressed glitter, and today we're going to be talking about some of the palettes in my collection that kind of stump me, kind of make me think harder before I can decide what to do with them. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, stick with me. We're getting into it right now. So there's a lot of different reasons why I still have some of these palettes, and there's reasons why I bought them in the first place. Definitely they have very attractive appearing color stories, but sometimes then when I get them home I'm like, how do I put this together? How do I make this a look without doing just one matte and one shimmer, or making it all monochromatic, or making it just a rainbow look? You know, sometimes it gets a little bit challenging. So I wanted to kind of go over those palettes today. I thought that would be interesting and different. So the first one to talk about is the ColourPop Ticket to Dreamland palette. And this one I bought because the packaging was really, really pretty. And then when I actually got the color story home, you know, you've got some of these, like you have a whole row of the mattes that have the sparkles in them. Then you have this row of like shimmery shades and this row of mattes. Minus, I think this shade right here is actually like a metallic. But it's like I look at this and I'm like, well, what do I do with this? I mean, I know I could do, you know, like kind of this shade, this shade, this shade kind of thing. But I just feel like all together, I don't know if it's the background color that throws me off, but all together I feel like these don't quite make a cohesive color story, and then I just get a little overwhelmed by it, and then I just put it away. So I'm saving this one. I'm hoping I can take some of these shades out and kind of revamp with some of my other larger ColourPop palettes that have the magnetic pans, and be able to keep the packaging and make it into something that I really enjoy. Oh gosh. Alright, the next one we'll talk about is this one from Pinky Rose Cosmetics. This is the Obsessed palette, and it looks like this. Now, for somebody who is not like a super color lover, they like to do the warm tone neutral looks, this is probably like an easy peasy palette to work with. But since I tend not to do them, although I'm doing one today, since I tend not to do them, I get a little bit lost with this palette, and I feel like these kind of like teals and blues don't mesh as well with these warm tones as kind of I think they were intended. So I just get like a little bit overwhelmed, I feel a little bit frustrated, and then I just stop using the palette. So this one is kind of hanging out until I get back into my phase of liking warm tone neutrals, and then hopefully I'll pick that one up a little bit more. The next one, this is the Wild palette from Huda Beauty, and can you guys see that? Oh, yeah, you can see it. So you can see the front there is really cool, and I do really like the inside, but I think there is a distinct difference between these shades up here and these shades down here. Like these 4 shades definitely go together. These 5 blue, green, yellowy kind of shades definitely go together, but I don't think they all go together. I don't like how they look together. So whenever I use this palette, I kind of go into it just for the shimmers, and then I skip over the mattes almost entirely for the most part, because I just I'm not vibing with them the way I think I should. Next up, this is the Nabla Dreamy 2 palette, and it looks like this. Can I keep this in focus? Let me see. Might have to do a little bit of both of us being in focus here. So it looks like this. I really love the shimmers in here, like this shimmer especially, and this one I think look really pretty. But these 3 pull very cool tone for me, and although everything else is like more cool toned, it's very like reddish brown, and I don't tend to like to use them together. So I pull in for those couple of colors, but then I end up having to use something else to kind of finish out the look. So for me, this is one of those palettes that kind of throws me off when I try to use it. The next one is the Juvia's Place I Live, I Love. This is one of their winter palettes, and it looks like this. Originally I was not going to purchase this because it does have a pressed glitter in it, which is this one, and I don't like that. But I picked it up because the rest of the shades were really pretty. However, they're all super, super light. So every time I come into this, I'm like, do I just do a super light palette, like color story that nobody's going to barely be able to see on my eyes, or do I build something with this and then pull something else in? It's, again, one of those palettes that on its own, I just don't think it has enough to make it special, but when you pull in with something else, it will look a little bit better. So it kind of throws me off when I grab for it. The next one is the Ruby May Cosmetics Purple Kush palette, and it looks like this. Now, I do like this color story. I do think it's a cool color story, but I feel like you have, again, that sort of two separate color stories here. You have this like kind of purpley, mauve-y type area, and then you have this like bright orange and green. So I tend to feel a little bit disjointed with this palette, and then I get kind of overwhelmed by it. I do think the colors are pretty though. The shimmers are really pretty. Like this one is like that classic like blue-brown kind of a shade, but it has like the burgundy undertone to it. Really like that. So I keep it because I think it's pretty, but again, I don't tend to use it by itself because I think the color story is a little disjointed. The next one to talk about is the Odin's Eye and Saga Freya palette, and I picked this up because I saw a couple of Instagram looks where people did these really, really pretty eye looks, and I just was like, you know what? I want to have eye looks like that, and so I bought this palette, and then I get it, and I look at it, and I'm like, what the heck do I do with this palette? Because I feel like the greens and oranges are so opposite one another, it again just feels very disjointed, and I have trouble kind of making them blend together seamlessly. I do think the shimmers in this palette though are really pretty, particularly these two. Very, very pretty. So that's the hard part for me, is I'm drawn to the shimmers in this palette, but again, I feel like I have to use other palettes to try to make this one work. Another palette that stumps me a little bit is the Rebel Rouge Labs Gods and Monsters palette, which the cover looks like that, and then the inside cover looks like this. So they do a different cover for the inside and the outside. But this is the color story, and I think the reason why this kind of throws me off so much is there's just so many different colors going on, and it's not a rainbow. I'm cool with that. I think that's great because we have plenty of rainbow palettes out there. We don't need that. But then I get into the palette and I'm like, oh, what do I do? So usually when I get into this palette, I end up doing kind of monochromatic like blue-green kind of color stories, or like pinky-red kind of color stories. I have trouble incorporating this purple unless I'm using this blue. So it's just a little bit more nuanced for me to use this in a way that I really like it. But looking at this palette, again, I'm like, dang, I need to get this out and use it more because it is such a pretty color story. Like every time I look at this, I'm like, wow, beautiful color story. And then I pick it up to actually use it and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. You guys ever feel like that? Are there palettes that you guys have where you feel like you don't know what you're doing? Because I would love to know which ones you have that are like that, or that you've tried that are like that, or not purchased because they're like that. You're a better person than me. The next one is the Nomad and Berlin Underground palette, and I really like this grungy color story. But again, because I don't do a lot of warm tone neutrals, I get kind of lost. So I tend to like use this row, or I come into it just for this iridescent green, and then I kind of skip everything else because I'm like, if I'm not going to do a warm toned eye look, I don't know what I'm going to do with this palette. And I feel like because these greens definitely look a little bit more cool toned, and so do those 4 shades there, that then the rest of the center of the palette doesn't make a lot of sense with those shades. Now, could I still make it work? Yes, I could. But again, I just struggle with it. So it's on my list of palettes that give me a hard time. The other palette that's like that is the Nomad and Orient Express palette. I actually won this palette. I was so excited to win this palette from Nomad because they had put out clues for this palette like they do with every one of their palettes, and the first clue was this very like vague clue, like it's the scene for, you know, mysteries or something like that, and I guessed Orient Express, and Felicia messaged me, that's the owner, and she's like, I can't believe you got the name of the place based off that one clue. That was such a vague clue. Like, well, don't mind if I do. So I ended up winning this palette from her, and from her and Auntie, and I'm so thankful. When I come into this palette, again, I just feel a little bit lost because I feel like you have a lot of these like really pretty pops of color, but when I try to put them all together, it's a little bit more challenging for me. I feel like a lot of the mattes don't go with the shimmers unless you want to do like nude mattes with a pop of a certain like shimmery color, so that kind of stresses me out a little bit, so I tend not to use this one. However, I do really like putting together these 2 shades. They make this very like silky neutral brown, almost pink leaning, like almost like a pantyhose type consistency of colors, and I do really like those 2 together. So when I use this palette, I tend to go in for those 2. Oh my god, I almost threw a whole bunch of palettes on the floor. Okay, next up, this is the Nomad and America's Parks palette. It looks like this, and I think this one is a really pretty color story, but again, because it's like warm tone neutrals, I tend to struggle a little bit. I do really like this set of shades here, and I do really like this yellow. The duochrome shades here in the middle are all very, very pretty. It's not a quality issue at all. It's just whenever I go into it, I feel a little lost as to what I'm supposed to use first or how I can use these together. But I do really like their formula, so I keep collecting their palettes. In a similar vein is the Profusion. This is the New Moon Rising palette. This is a palette that they put together last Halloween, I think, and I picked it up shortly before I moved, but this is what this palette looks like. And again, it's warm tone neutrals. Could I put those together? Yeah, but I want to do something more interesting with this palette than that, and I get a little lost. I tend to like these 4 shades right here, and then when I try to use anything else, I'm like, it just doesn't look like it goes together. So I struggle with this one, but I do think the color story is really pretty, which is why I bought it in the first place. The Menagerie and Serenity palette. This was Annette's Makeup Corner's first collab that she released, and it looks like this. Again, really pretty colors, lots of brights here, and it's basically a rainbow palette to an extent, but it's definitely more heavily weighted on like blues and greens, and I do really appreciate that. But this very cool toned iridescent blue, I struggle to make it fit with everything else in this palette because these feel so warm that I don't know, it just doesn't work for me. And then you've got this very like cranberry purple shade with a very like grapey purple matte, so I feel like those two don't go together. Like, it's just, I don't know. I open this up and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna use that palette, and then I open it up and look at it and I'm like, what am I gonna do with this palette? And then I close it and just grab for something easier. Same thing with this one. So I picked this up from Odin's Eye. This is one of their collab palettes. This is the Hummingbird palette with Tina the Fancy Face, and I do really like the color story. You've got this beautiful multi-chrome shade right here, but when I go into it, I mean, yeah, you can do these kind of shades here, you could do these kind of shades here, but it just, I don't know, it feels like it's missing something. I feel a little confused or lost. It's kind of hard for me to know for sure what to do with it, so I tend to skip over it and use something else. Okay, 4 more and then I think we're done. The next one up is the Gnome Chrome palette. This is from Sugar Drizzle Polish, and the actual palette itself is a palette of toppers. So is it all designed to go together? No. But when I come in and I look at these colors, then I just start thinking like, what am I supposed to do with these? What am I supposed to make with this? And I just feel overwhelmed and I put it away. I feel like I struggle to find even matte palettes that'll go with this, just because the colors are so interesting and dimensional that I don't want to lose that in the mattes, but then I don't feel like I have mattes that go with it. The next one is the Magic Mini by Juvia's Place, and I got this for the like cool toned rose. Like the cool tone rose altogether, I love it. The warm toned rose, I don't care about at all. But when I put the whole thing together, I'm like, how do you mix all this? Like, seriously, how? And I saw a look that Lauren May Beauty did with this palette, and it was absolutely stunning. I recreated it and I was obsessed with that look. But beyond that, like, I struggled to figure out how to mix all these rows together. She did it beautifully. For me, it just doesn't come to me in my brain. Second to last, I have 2 from Beauty Bay now. So second to last is the A.O. Coralie palette, which looks like this, and I like the packaging on this is so awesome. I love it so much. But the actual like shades inside, you've got like neons, pastels, and 2 shimmers, and then these are kind of like satiny shimmers. And I feel like if you don't just make like a rainbow kind of look, then there's really not a whole lot else to do with this palette. And I know that that's not the case, but every time I look at it, that's where I kind of get stuck. And so that's been kind of a disappointment for me, is trying to figure out how to use this a little bit more creatively to make it more interesting. And then the last one that I'll mention is the Nikki Tutorials palette. So this one is another Beauty Bay special, and it looks like this. And again, I just struggle to find like ways to make this an interesting color story on my eyes without making it look too zany and without just using like all the neutrals. I do think the shimmers are really pretty. I think the choice of mattes is what throws me off with this palette. Alright, and that is everything for this video. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, and I'm going to catch you in my next video.